Greetings and welcome to Gripping Horror. Chris and Chrissy Rouse were a father and son dive team of the early 1980s. Their passion for the sport fueled a dive that led them 240 feet deep into remote Atlantic waters. Many cautioned that their level of training might not be sufficient for such an advanced endeavor, but their yearning for fame and recognition proved to be stronger than their concerns about training. Unfortunately, it would seem that it was the Rouses' place in history to demonstrate what happens when overconfidence and ego blinds divers of their limitations. This is their story. The Rouses had gotten into diving in the mid-1980s, back when the idea of a middle-class family in rural Pennsylvania owning a small airplane and taking long vacations every year wasn't entirely preposterous. They first tried the sport for reasons that seem almost quaint today. Life was just too predictable. Both Chris and Chrissy longed to explore the world. They wanted to discover something new, to be somebody, to make a name for themselves. The Rouses had a complicated relationship. You see, Chris and Chrissy would bicker constantly, but did love each other and would almost solely dive with each other. But their relationship seemed to revolve around a pattern of trying to one-up the other. This created a slight tension between them, making their father-son bond more complex than it appeared at first glance. Despite this, they shared a massive passion for diving, so naturally they learned and progressed within the sport very fast, going from open water divers to certified cave divers and tech divers within a few years. With less than 500 dives under their belts each, some would say that they were too inexperienced to be where they were within the sport. In 1991, a now retired long-time deep wreck diver named Bill Nagel, who led a team that recovered one of the Andrea Doria ship's bells, was the captain of the recreational deep dive boat Seeker out of New Jersey. Bill had an intriguing tale from a friend and a local charter boat captain. Every time the captain took a group out to an area off the coast, all his clients caught fish. The captain knew that this was no fluke and told Bill, "There's something under there." Curiosity got the best of Bill, and he and some diver buddies, including John Chatterton and Richie Kohler, organized an expedition to the area. Sure enough, just 75 miles off the coast of New Jersey, they found the wreck of a World War II German submarine. When the divers checked Navy records, they found that no wreck had been recorded for that position. Thus began a 6-year adventure to identify the U-boat and its crew. The explorers searched the sub for a hull or boat number that would positively identify the wreck. Their dives were fraught with danger as the sub sat at 240 feet of water, requiring 250 pounds of gear, decompression stops on the way up, and scuba tanks full of a mixture of 3 gases for faster decompression. An expedition on September 2nd, 1991, ended in tragedy. One of the divers, Stephen Feldman, for reasons unknown, was rendered unconscious and swept away in the current. He was not recovered until several months later, far from the wreck by a commercial fisherman. Months had passed, with little to show but a few artifacts that added no immediate evidence to the wreck's identity. Therefore, in the year of 1992, the Rouses received an invitation to join the Seeker for its upcoming expedition. John Chatterton deemed them perhaps the most formidable diving team in the country, and believed they might be the ones to crack this unsolvable case. This was no faint praise coming from a diver as accomplished as John Chatterton. His confidence was echoed by the Rouses themselves. 22-year-old Chrissy boldly declared, "I'm going to identify the wreck. I'm going to be the one to do it." This macho and overconfident attitude, frequently exhibited by Chris and Chrissy, is the main factors that facilitated their rapid advancement in diving, but also what occasionally placed them in risky situations. Prior to diving the Yoo-Hoo, the Rouses had zero experience penetrating the confines of U-boats, which is mandatory for safety in technical and deep wrecks, such as the Yoo-Hoo. They also had very little experience on deep wrecks in the Northern Atlantic. They had one prior expedition to the Andrea Doria and nothing else notable under their belts. Minor inconveniences seemed to continually plague the Rouses. It was such a standing joke, in fact, that Chris named his diving equipment repair business Black Cloud Scuba. That was run out of the family home. Susan Rouse went as far to state on record, "Everyone always said we had a black cloud over our heads. Something always went wrong." Chris had even started making his own dive equipment after his excavating company went under during the Reagan recession. On October the 12th, 1992, the Seeker arrived 75 miles off New Jersey for the last dive of the season. The day's conditions were unfavorable, characterized by choppy and unpredictable seas. Consequently, numerous team members opted out of the dive due to the challenging circumstances. Notably, Chrissy fell down several times on the way to the water after gearing up. It should be noted that both Chris and Chrissy expressed doubts about the dive. Before descending, each of them said, at separate times, that they did not want to do the dive. In each case, the other badgered the other into agreeing to go. There is some speculation that the constant goading of Chrissy Rouse by his father led to his wanting to prove something to him on their final dive. Due to financial constraints, the Rouses chose to make the 240-foot dive on regular air, rather than Trimix, which was available at the time. Despite receiving warnings from others about the risks of using regular air for such a deep dive, Chris and Chrissy proceeded with their choice. When asked for a reason, they stated that they wanted to save money. Just to put things into perspective, at depths below 200 feet, nitrogen narcosis can get so intense for a diver that severe hallucinations are almost inevitable. This can be mitigated mostly by the use of Trimix. The Rouse's intense fixation for the dive and gaining recognition from identifying the wreck is said to have also significantly impacted their judgment. John descended alongside the Rouses. As cave divers, Chris and Chrissy practiced leaving their decompression bottles attached to the line outside the wreck, as some cavers leave their bottles on the lines. But, knowing that they were going to do this, they failed to stage redundant gas on the upline. Even with all their equipment, they could stay at the bottom for only 30 minutes at a time. To make matters worse, the sub was badly damaged. To find anything that identified the sub, John, Chris and Chrissy had to navigate a mass of cables, dislodged equipment, and sediment. Chrissy was penetrating the wreck, his last few dives trying to free a piece of canvas with German writing from underneath some debris. At the point, he nearly had it free. He was at the end of his dive plan, and narcosis was strong. He pulled the canvas free when a large piece of steel landed on him, pinning his head down. Chrissy struggled but could not free himself. With no options left, he cried out at the top of his lungs for help. Chris, realizing that Chrissy was past his dive time, went in to find him and worked to free him, knowing he had almost no bottom time left. By this time, Chrissy was experiencing narcosis beyond control. Chris eventually managed to free Chrissy, but the effort exhausted their air supplies. Since the wreck was all stirred up and visibility was down to zero, they could not find the way out the way they came in, so they exited further down the ship away from the line and decompression bottles they required for their ascent. Supposedly on the torpedo up, they stopped around 100 feet because they saw the anchor line and had planned to do a short decompression there and head to the surface. At this point, the narcosis that both Chris and Chrissy were encountering is said to have reached a level equivalent to consuming more than 17 martinis. When they ascended, Chrissy tried to breathe off Chris's bottle, but got a mouthful of water due to a torn mouthpiece. He panicked and bolted to the surface. Chris quickly followed, both without making the necessary stops to let the nitrogen in their blood safely dissolve. Such an uncontrolled ascent is almost guaranteed to give a diver a severe case of decompression sickness, often called the bends. Once they surfaced, the divers on the boat knew it was over for them. A diver who gets hit with the bends will be wrecked by tremendous pain in every part of their body, as nitrogen bubbles that accumulate in vessels and arteries while diving begin to expand. The reason it's called the bends is that divers will writhe and contort themselves into grotesque shapes when suffering from a severe case. Even a non-fatal case can cause paralysis or brain damage. Many divers who have survived the bends have said they'd rather have drowned. Neither of the Rouses was so lucky. Once the Coast Guard arrived, John argued with the Coast Guard swimmer to take Chris's lifeless body on the helicopter with Chrissy. The swimmer refused a number of times until John pointed to Chris Rouse, stating, "You've got to take him. We can't risk another basket drop for a dead guy. Are you a medical doctor? Then you can't tell me he's dead for certain. You've got to take him." "No." "Look, the kid thinks his father's still alive. We've been telling him that, so that he keeps on fighting to live. He's got to see his old man on the chopper with him. Otherwise, he'll know he's dead." The swimmer stared at him. "Do you have any idea how risky a basket lift is? We just can't do it for a dead guy." Eventually the swimmer gave in and they took both. It took an extra 20 minutes to load Chris on the helicopter before Chrissy was flown into New York City to a hyperbaric chamber in Bronx Municipal Hospital. At the hospital, they tried to take a blood sample from him. What they got in the vial was foam rather than blood. This caused the blood to clot right in his veins. The situation seemed to be improving slightly when Chrissy began regaining feeling in his limbs and speaking coherently. The hospital then decided to depressurize Chrissy from 160 feet to 60 feet, at which point he lost consciousness and died. Before he died, he told medics he heard the jungle drums and believed a monster was trying to eat him. According to experts, they were essentially dead men the second they hit the surface, and it was pretty amazing that Chrissy even reached the hospital. Survival after coming straight to the surface after 30 plus minutes at 240 feet is very unlikely, even with an on-site recompression chamber. Susan Rouse was notified of the accident by the hospital, but not given details. Chrissy died 5 minutes after she arrived at the hospital, but she was unable to see him before he died. Ironically, she almost joined her family on that Sandy Hook dive, but decided against taking off from work. On the 31st of August 1997, and about 5 years after Chris and Chrissy's death, they concluded that the boat they found was U-869, a large ocean submarine for sustained operations far from the home support facilities which sank on the 11th of February 1945. Experts propose that trimix, radio communication, a line to the anchor, more caution, staying out of the water on such a rough day, some humidity, and even in-water recompression might have saved them. But it is all really just speculation. The point that the author of Last Dive makes is that what would have saved them more than anything else would have been a communication system between themselves and the surface. May they rest in peace. This has been Gripping Horror. I hope to see you in the next one.